There have been more mass shootings in the U.S. in 2023 than there have been days, and it almost happened here. A few weeks ago, a shooting took place at the West Side Walmart. We're here to discuss what sort of training local officials receive for these critical incidents and how the individuals cope with the trauma afterwards. That's next on WNIN Newsmakers. First responders must be prepared for anything. So how do they prepare for crisis situations that may or may not happen? We have Vanderburgh County Sheriff Noah Robinson and Interim Director of the Evansville-Vanderburgh County Central Dispatch, Carrie James, with us. Thanks for being here to both of you.
Thank you. Now permanent director, Carrie James.
I am now permanent director. Congratulations.
Thank
All right,
you.
We get to announce that right in this show today. Well, we are really focusing on the shooting that happened at Walmart. And in a crisis situation, so many things go through so many people's minds, and you're really in this reactive mode. But officers and dispatchers often go through specialized training to make sure that they respond in the right way. So can you explain, first of all, what officers go through, what type of training they undergo in order to respond appropriately?
It's the kind of incident we hope never happens, but we realize that when it does, we have to be ready to handle it. And I'm so thankful if we were in this instance. I had no doubt that we would react this way. I've heard of other agencies around the country. Occasionally you hear about some less than ideal response, but I never had that worry about our Evansville Police Department or our Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office, because we do place such an emphasis on training, and not just the training itself, but being very clear about our expectations, what we want our deputies to do when confronted with a situation like this.
So what types of training? You probably don't want to give away any secrets or anything like that, but what types of intense training do you do in order to make sure that they know that it's kind of like muscle memory? They don't have to think in situations like that.
I don't know that there's any big secrets to it. It's law enforcement can't just be about combat. We have to do such a wide range of things. So in the military, you're trained specifically to neutralize threats for combat. We're trained on a variety of topics, be it domestic violence investigation, a whole litany of things, how to do a traffic stop. You have to be competent in a wider range of things that make part of a deputy's daily activities. But this is one thing we have to be proficient at. And since we do it so infrequently, training is key. And so it comes down to just being comfortable with weapon handling, being used to throwing on your tactical vest quickly and expeditiously, making sure that your weapon is ready to go, and being comfortable handling a long gun or a patrol rifle, as we call it, not a gun you would normally handle every day. Your pistol is normally your weapon that you carry routinely, but when confronted with a gunman, you want to have a bigger gun, so to speak. And so it's not something we carry every day, and so we have to train with it so that we're ready to use it appropriately when the time comes.
Well, and dispatchers, unsung heroes, and such a critical piece in any crisis situation. What types of training do your dispatchers go through in order to make sure that they know how to handle these situations appropriately?
Well, whenever they're hired in, we have a 6-month training program. Most facilities don't have that long of training, but we have our own training. They go through that, and then some of us have actually had active shooter training through places like APCO or NINA, which are national organizations that help with training situations and that sort of thing. So they do get some training in active shooting, and they get their normal everyday, we have to take this phone call for domestic violence or a person with a gun, or in this case, the active shooter. So they're prepared to take responsibility and do their job like they should.
Such amazing response during that incident on the West Side. So how important and how crucial is that training that kicks in a situation such as that?
Yeah, you mentioned muscle memory, which in a sense is true. It's being ready to respond and not hesitating when the call comes in. And that partnership that we have with dispatch is absolutely essential. We can't see everything. The deputy or the officer who responds to that incident can see his or her field of vision. but we rely on dispatch to relay to us what's going on in other parts of the building. There were numerous 911 calls coming in, and they were the funnel that got what we needed to know to us over the radio so that we could best locate this individual who was engaging in these acts. That's how we were able to, other than the shots being fired, gain some intelligence about where he might be in the building. And so that communications link is critical in an incident like this.
So how does a dispatcher respond in that situation? And when you help us walk through that with us in this scenario where you've got multiple dispatchers fielding multiple calls and how you coordinate that information to get that to the people, the boots on the ground that need that in such a quick time frame.
We have one dispatcher that dispatches for the sheriff's office, and we have one that dispatches for the police department. They're all in one room together. So the first call, the sheriff's dispatcher heard her say, "Who has the gun?" or something to that effect, and she just immediately started sending everybody. She didn't wait for the run card to go on the computer. She started sending everybody. And it's the same way with the gentleman that was doing city dispatch, police dispatch. He immediately started sending everybody he could. So you get the information from the caller. The first caller was all the callers were wonderful, but the first caller immediately said active shooter, Walmart West. So we knew we had a situation. The dispatchers in the room knew something was going on. Their first job was to inform the responding officers and units that this is going to be a big deal. We've got an active shooter. Everybody, we need to get moving now. We had deputies that had just called off duty say, "Put me back on the computer. I'm going back en route. I'm going." So, and people were coming from all around. The people at the Old Dominion concert, officers were coming from there. I heard of a sick officer that went in response, and our dispatchers, the different people that were taking calls, putting everything they could on the run card so that the dispatcher could actually give it to the responding units in a timely fashion so that they knew before they got there, okay, he's back in the office or wherever he happened to be at that time. So they could get that, and the first officer in knew, okay, I'm going to have to go this way, or however he thought he needed to go. So knew what he was looking for, what kind of description he had, and all that sort of thing.
It's amazing to hear you talk because the proactiveness of all of the departments as opposed to just sitting and reacting to information that's coming in by actively going out and doing things before they were ever asked to do. So because we've seen a proliferation of incidents with weapons, how does a dispatcher, how do they triage a call that's coming in that involves a weapon, that this is really this big deal, that I would need to be so proactive to just bring everyone in, and or how do you kind of triage and know how to respond to different types of
There are
incidents?
certain questions we ask. Obviously, where is this happening at? Do you have a description of the suspect? Are there any weapons involved? And the faster we get that information from you, the faster we can get it on the run card, the faster your response is going to be, and the more informed and ready the officer responding is going to be. It's just a matter of asking questions, and when you get the answer from the caller, that triggers another question. So it's it's kind of like being a journalist, except it's in a right here, right now, we've got to get it information sort of thing. So.
And again, we talk about this amazing coordination, but the sheriff's office and the EPD. Tell us a little bit more about the coordination between the two offices during this incident.
It helps to be on the same radio system. And so I can't imagine trying to do a response like this and not have the officers be able to easily communicate with one another. But it's useful to have similar training models. And do joint training because we're used to responding to one another. And so, we are two separate agencies. We have our own culture. But when it comes to responding to how we handle law enforcement instances, we're on the same page. We now have a joint academy, so we send our sheriff deputies to the Southwest Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. So our officers and our deputies are getting to know each other. They're on the same page with our response, which can save seconds. You hear a phrase, if you watch the raw video from the encounter, you'll hear deputies and officers saying the phrase push, push, push. And so this was not the kind of incident where you can kind of sit back and wait for dispatch to tell you information. I'm glad to have it. It's useful for getting critical updates, But the mantra of the day was push, 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 keep moving toward the shots. You're hiding behind cover when needed, but you understand you can't stay there. You have to continually be pushing towards the suspect, otherwise lives are in danger.
So within that situation, so much coordination in the building, not just outside in terms of systemic, but right there. How do you prevent? I mean, there are shots going. You're trying to locate each other. You can hear people calling different, either, I don't know if it was colors or something to let them know of their locations. How do you keep from, for lack of a better saying, shooting each other?
Friendly fire you're talking
right,
about.
Right.
Yeah, it's a real risk. I mean, we're talking an adrenaline dump, right? The peak of an emotional, physical response, bullets flying, right? I can't imagine anything that would be more stressful and strenuous on a deputy or an officer. And so with that comes all those things you would expect: tunnel vision, the degradation of your auditory ability, and you're focused on threats. And you're rounding a corner and you see one of your fellow police officers and you don't properly identify him or her, and they're carrying a gun. They can look like a suspect pretty quick, especially when you have someone responding that weren't full uniform. A big worry, right? And so, yeah, you heard the fray, you heard some colors being shouted to let the deputies and officers know who they were and to avoid friendly fire. But it was a risk, a really severe risk, when you're trying to search for a suspect in a large building like that, and you're trying to do it quickly. Luckily, no mistakes that result in injury were made, but it is a risk, and unfortunately, it does sometimes come with the job.
So in a situation like that, different jurisdictions, who takes jurisdiction, who has that jurisdiction, and then who spearheads that response in that moment?
So we've, in a shooting response or an active shooter, we don't emphasize as much when it comes to command and control. We don't want individual officers or deputies waiting for a command to go in. They need to be self-starters. And so we're trusting these individuals with a handgun and giving them power to arrest. We trust them to make right decisions, and that's what we found is giving that kind of control at the lowest possible level. And our own military does this. When we're so successful in the military, because we do allow decisions to be made at the lowest possible level, and law enforcement is no different. The best response happens when you give deputies and officers the authority to make decisions at the lowest possible level. And we say, go in, don't wait. We go in, as Chief Billy Bowen said. And so that provides the best possible outcome, because speed is of the essence here. And so when you empower your folks to make good decisions, give them the tools they need to do it and the training to make it happen, positive outcomes can occur.
As you mentioned, such an adrenaline rush, such a trauma involved in a situation like this and the stress of that. How do each of you help your departments, your employees, and the people who are involved in the situation process this, decompress, and deal with what's happened?
Carrie, you want to comment first?
We have started a peer support team at Central Dispatch. So we have peer support, and our supervisor from second shift, Kathleen Smith, is involved in that. She actually started the idea and brought it to me, and we were in with it because we've never had that in the 30 years that I've been there. This was the first mention of, let's start a peer support team for incidents like this. And we have already had our debriefing for this actual incident. We give them a chance to come in and talk, one-on-one or in a group, however they want to do it. And it just gives them a time to work things out. And I know after the incident had settled down just a little bit, I know the dispatchers in the room, they stand up from their consoles and they talk to each other and they talk about, oh my gosh, it was so scary. And, it was just such, and they're still, for lack of a better word, buzzing from the adrenaline. So they're just standing there and they're talking to each other and trying to figure out, what could I have said different? Did I make sure that everybody was on the run card? Did I make sure I sent enough people? Just kind of giving a critique of what they did and getting some of their emotions out so that when they go home in the morning, they can kind of sit at home with their kids or however they relax when they get home and think about, okay, I've had a little talk, now I need to just kind of de-stress and try to get some rest. And then they have the peer support team there for their full debriefing whenever it comes around. And like I said, we've already had that. And I know the Sheriff's Department and the other departments that responded have that sort of thing too.
Sheriff Robinson, do you have a specific program in place, or is that just voluntary, or how do you handle that?
I'll give the Evansville Police Department a lot of credit. They have a really robust peer support team. And we do as well, although ours probably needs a little work. And so that's something that we are working on improving that participation right now. Something we did start at the very beginning of the year. I'd hoped to roll it out formally before we had an instance like this happen. But we started doing mandatory counseling. Previously, if an officer or deputy was involved in a critical incident, as we sometimes call it, we would make counseling optional and leave it to the deputy or the officer to decide whether they want to go to counseling or not. We took that discretion away from them. And I thought that was important because some folks, there's kind of, in this profession, can kind of a macho attitude sometimes. And I didn't want the deputy or officer to feel like they didn't need it and didn't feel comfortable to asking for it. And so you make it mandatory, it just relieves that burden from them. Yeah, I've got to go, I might as well make the best of it. So we pay them to go on duty. And I've heard some pretty good reports from that. There's something about talking to a complete stranger about something that happens. You know that what you're saying is confidential. There's something about talking to a total stranger who's trained to listen to you that can be very liberating. And I'm very glad we're doing that now. And I would encourage any other police agency to make counseling mandatory anytime one of their deputies is involved in an instance like this.
Well, very briefly, can each of you give one suggestion? If someone is involved in an active shooter, one thing that they should keep in mind and do, and if someone needs to call 911, what's the most important thing that you want them to know in calling 911? Can you each address that?
Do you want to address the 911?
You go ahead.
I think the most important thing to remember if you're confronted with someone in an active shooter or active killer kind of situation is if you can find an avenue of escape, take it immediately, don't wait. And so much time is lost as someone who's involved in a case like this might be waiting was that a gunshot? I'm not sure. What am I hearing? And then poking your head out to investigate and not taking the potential threat seriously. And so I think it's important that if you suspect that someone is in the building that's trying to kill you and you're not sure what you're hearing, don't investigate. Don't walk down the hall to look for the source. Go to the nearest exit, get out, call 911, and let us figure it out. But I think a lot of time is lost in folks delaying. And if you are suspicious about something, go with your instinct. If the hairs in the back of your neck are standing up, that's telling you something. Get out of there. Take people with you. Take charge immediately. Don't wait.
Okay, thank you.
When you call 911, either in an active shooter or any kind of incident, the first thing we're going to know is, where are you? I need to know where you're at to be able to send you the help you need. And then, of course, like I said, it's kind of like being a journalist. Where are you at? What's been happening? Are there any weapons involved? And a lot of times people think that we're delaying response when we're asking these questions, but we are not. This is information that we need so that the officers and the firefighters are prepared. So where are you? What's going on? And that sort of thing. And just answer the dispatcher's questions. They're not trying to be rude. They're not delaying a response. They just need that information.
All right. And we do want to acknowledge that we invited the EPD to join you tonight, and they were unable to come, but you all should be very, very commended in this incident and your response, and we appreciate all your information and your service.
If I could, I would like to say a thank you to the fire department, Evansville Fire Department, and also EMA, because I know fire department was on scene helping with triage and that sort of stuff, and I know that Director Weaver from EMA had started that way, and I believe he did end up on scene. So they contributed quite a bit too.
And the Indiana State Police as well responded,
yes.
along with the local ATF office.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now is Wyeth Hatfield. He is the supervisor of the Employee Assistance Program at Southwest Behavioral Healthcare and also an outpatient therapist. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks.
So, Employee Assistance Program, we've seen such a boom in the demand for mental health care. So can you explain to us what an Employee Assistance Program is and how it can benefit?
Well, so employers that have an employee assistance program, that's generally a free benefit. So a person might have access to see a therapist 1 to 8, 12 times per year at no charge and not through their regular insurance. And it's a confidential visit. So the employers, they do not get notes or records, and there's no report back, so it's completely confidential, and it's just a really nice way to go and get some feedback, to help de-stress, to get some questions answered that maybe a person has had for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So have you seen an increase in the demand for employee assistance programs? I know it's been around for a long time, but has that demand ticked up from the employer side and also from the employee side as well?
I think the most marked increase was at the beginning of the pandemic. Nationwide, anxiety, depression, and distress in general, it just went up. And now that, and it still hasn't come down. For some people, there's a sense of, well, everything's over with, and now we've been moving on. But the distress level and anxiety, it's still at the same level.
And do you feel like maybe the pandemic really brought out and brought up many of the mental health care issues that may have been underlying or kind of festering, and we just did not shine a light on that, or even personally didn't recognize that this was kind of what was happening in our lives until some crisis kind of brought it to bear?
That's exactly the experience I've had is, especially with trauma, before the pandemic, there was such an activity level in life. People could kind of outrun things and stay busy and distracted. And then when there's the sudden stop and isolation, which in and of itself is not healthy, it's kind of like all this stuff from the past just comes slamming forward, and the number of trauma cases that came, it was amazing. And anxiety, depression, et cetera, in general, those definitely came to the surface for people.
So why was the Employee Assistance Program created? Obviously, Southwestern saw a need, but what kind of brought that to bear?
Southwestern is a community mental health center which will identify community mental health needs and then attempt to be responsive to creating services to meet that demand or those needs. So that in large part would be how things developed.
So in an incident or in a situation like the Walmart incident, where a crisis might happen at a workplace or something like that, does Southwestern proactively go into a crisis situation like that, or are you mainly responding according to the employee assistance programs that are already established?
So our CEO and our crisis team, they're very community oriented, and there have been times in the past, and there are examples and incidents where they're very proactive and they want to get out there and see how they can be of assistance.
Wonderful. So if an employer, say a small business or someone is watching tonight, and they're really considering the employee assistance program, offering that to their employees in order to address some of the mental health crisis that's going on right now, what would you say to them, and how would you encourage them in order to sign up?
Well, they can call Southwestern Mental Health Center and ask for myself, Wyeth Hatfield, or Elizabeth Arnold. She's really the best point of contact. She's Director of Adult Services, and then she would be able to help work out options and look at finances and how things would best suit the employer to meet their employee needs and to take care of their employees.
You know, mental health care has come with such a stigma in the past, and really there's been great strides in trying to work through that and overcome that, and so many people have been encouraging of that. But if someone is actually working at an employer who has an EAP program and they're just not sure, they just don't want to take that first step, or as you mentioned, they're concerned that their information is going to be shared or what they talk about is going to be sent back to their employer, what would you have to say to them in terms of kind of overcoming those objections?
I usually like to talk to people right up front as soon as I meet them in session to see if there are any of those concerns, and if they're concerned at all, I'll explain to them the process and how the contracts usually actually specify, absolutely, this is confidential. In many instances, for employers, we just send them a number of employees that we saw that month. No name, nothing, they just get a number. So really, helping people understand that process and how a release of information works if they decided, for whatever reason, that they wanted information to go out. We're really under a lot of federal guidelines and safeguards and protection type things to make sure that people they can feel confidential and safe. Otherwise, it's just not in a therapeutic environment.
Well, this might be kind of a tricky question and subject, but if I'm an employer and I am noticing some odd behavior or some aggressive behavior, say for instance, in the instance of the person involved in the Walmart shooting, there had been some aggressive behavior before this incident happened. What can I do as an employer or as an HR representative? Are there any steps that I can take to recognize that and begin to mitigate that if I either have an employee assistance program or if I do not?
So yeah, some of that it would be more of an HR question in terms of the particular what is it they can and should do legally. But if you have an EAP program, you can encourage the employee to go and get help, to take a look at issues, to see what's going on. Yeah, so it's a teamwork partnership between the employer and employee. We're here as a resource.
You know, work stress can really start to bear on us. We often bring work home and home to work. Any suggestions that you have for people who are starting to feel that stress, might not have an EAP program, or might some of the tools and tips that you might suggest just to them in order to help alleviate that stress that they're feeling?
Sure. Oh, that's a good question. And so this at first may sound cliche, but this is some of the most powerful pieces of mental hygiene and mental health is regular daily exercise where you get your heart rate up, food that's nutritious, avoiding the junk food, keeping caffeine low, no caffeine after 3 or 5 o'clock, and sleep. So a lot of people play the sleep game. Yeah. I can function on 5 hours of sleep, but to work with anxiety and depression, getting a full night's sleep and diet and exercise, those are just huge. They're huge.
Interesting, because so many times when we think of mental health, we think of talking out issues or changing our thinking or changing those types of things, but really you're focused more on the physical side of this. There's really an actual physical part of this that is a big piece of this picture, right?
That's right. And traditionally, in the past, the mind and the body were separated and they became separate places and separate treatment. But the mind moves around in the brain. It's all part of the body. And even in the past maybe 15 years, there's been more of a move toward behavior integration, integrating physical and mental health because they're connected.
Yes.
They are wrapped up in the same thing.
All right. Well, Mr. Hatfield, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate all the great information you've shared today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks to all of our guests for discussing how first responders prepare for critical incidents. Next week, we'll be talking about the medical worker shortage and its impact locally. Thanks for watching WNIN Newsmakers.